Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is grip. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear grip used is to mean to grasp or hold something tightly using your hand. So I always think it can help to have a picture in mind. So we're sort of talking about that type of action. A second and related way you might hear grip used is to mean to maintain firm contact with something. So this second definition doesn't have to be connected to our hands. Instead, you might hear it in connection to shoes and how they allow you to maintain contact with certain surfaces, either easily or maybe not so well. You might also hear it used in connection to tires and how they maintain contact with the road, particularly in winter weather. A third way you'll hear the verb grip used is to mean to deeply affect someone's feelings or their emotions. Sometimes people will talk about how a particular movie gripped them, again, affected them in a emotional way. A fourth way you can use the verb grip is to mean to compel the attention or interest of another person or a group of people. You should know that grip is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, I'm going to need to double the P, the ending consonant there, before I add ing. And the reason I'm doing that is I have a one syllable word with one vowel, and it ends with consonant vowel consonant. So that requires me to double the last P there. That's going to form gripping. Okay. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made in a similar way. Again, I need to double the ending consonant, so I add a second P before I add ed. The base verb, grip, is an unvoiced sound. It ends with an unvoiced P sound. And this means that my past tense ending is going to make a T sound. So it should sound like this when I say it. Gripped, gripped. Hope you can hear that T sound on the end. Now, there aren't any phrasal verbs that we need to study, so instead, we can focus on making a few different sample sentences in different verb tenses. Today, we'll practice the past perfect and the simple present. We'll start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense when we want to note that a particular action occurred before either some action or before a certain point in time. To make the past perfect, I need two parts to my verb. I'm going to use the past form of have, which is had, and then I use the participle form of my verb. And because grip is a regular verb, my participle and past tense are the same. Okay. Let's take a look at an affirmative sentence. Anxiety had gripped Emery for as long as her parents could remember. Okay. So here we're talking about being affected by a strong feeling. You might think of anxiety as sort of this constant worry, that type of emotion. So here, this unfortunately was a part of a really sad story talking about someone who chose to end their life, and their parents were describing what that person had experienced. And so the past perfect was used, noting how long ago in the past this had started. Now, if I want to make a negative past perfect sentence, I'm going to start my sentence in a similar way. I have my subject, I use had, then I have not, and then the participle form the verb. Here's another example sentence. Drought hadn't gripped this region until last year. So here we're talking about an action not occurring before a certain point in time. Let's look at making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, I start with had, then I have my subject, okay? And then I have the participle form of the verb. Here's my practice sentence. Had you gripped the handlebars tightly? Okay. So that would tie back to that first definition of kind of holding something tightly with your hands. So maybe someone was telling me about an accident they had on their bike and was kind of asking, were you holding on tightly? That's my question. Before the accident occurred, had you been doing this? Okay. Now let's look at the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about our habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts. When we make sentences in the simple present, we need to pay attention to our subject. And that actually reminds me, I don't know that I said it, but in the past perfect, had and then participle, it's the same for all subjects. So that can be really nice. The simple present, we have to be aware of what our subject is. So if our subject is I, you, we, or they, then I'm just going to use the base verb. But if my subject is he, she, or it, then I need to add an S to the end of this verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. His novels always grip his readers from the first sentence. Okay? So here we're kind of talking about somebody being really interested, very focused. They read the first sentence and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to know what happens in this story. So here, novels is plural. That's why you do not see an S on the end of my verb. If I was just talking about one novel, I might say this novel grips with an S. Okay? Now, if I want to make a negative simple present sentence, again, I need to pay attention to my subject. If my subject is I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use do not and then the base verb. If my subject is he, she, or it, I'm going to use does not and then the base verb. So notice I'm not adding an S to the verb here in the negative. I'm only doing that in the affirmative or the positive. Here's another example sentence. This new straightener doesn't grip my hair as well as my last one. Right? So here I'm talking about a device that many people use to give their hair a particular look. And I'm talking about how it maintains contact. Goes back to that second definition of the verb. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, I start with do or does, whichever form matches my subject, and the subject comes next. Then we'll use the base verb after that. So again, no S on the end of my verb in my yes or no question. An example, does this bike tire grip well? Okay, so maybe someone is looking at buying some new tires. Ask this question to a salesperson or somebody who works in the bike shop. Okay. Now, I'm talking about one tire, so that's why you see does. If I was looking at multiple, right, then I would switch and say, do these tires grip well? Okay. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words and phrases related to our verb grip. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. There are many ways to use this noun. We're going to look, I think, at 5 definitions or 5 different ways. But first, let me point out, you'll notice the spelling and the pronunciation is exactly the same, whether it's a noun or a verb. But the first way you might hear the noun grip used is to refer to a firm hold of something or the manner of holding something, usually quite firmly. So an example of this might be, get a good grip on the banister, right? So think of kind of like something that's going to provide you support as you walk upstairs, right? So here, someone's advice, maybe the stairs are icy. So they're asking you, hold it tightly. Okay? A second way you'll hear the noun grip used is to refer to the ability of something to maintain that firm contact with a surface. So an example here, I need new shoes. These have no grip. This can be really important in certain sports or certain athletic events for you to be able to maintain good contact with the surface of something. A third way to use the noun grip is to refer to having an understanding of something. An example, do you have a good grip on this situation? So, might be something I say at work when there's some kind of problem, asking someone kind of, do we understand all the parts of it? Sometimes people will talk about this in my classes. I think I recently had a student say something to the effect of like they didn't have a good grip on this one particular verb tense and they wanted us to practice a little bit more. That's great. They're saying I don't have a good understanding of this. A fourth way you can use the noun grip is to refer to an effective form of control over something. Okay. I've heard many politicians say lately, our administration has a grip on inflation, right? We have certain policies in place. This is sort of, again, under control. They're trying to reassure people, don't worry. A fifth way you can use the noun grip is to refer to a person. This could be someone who works as an assistant in a theater, maybe a member of a camera crew, somebody who helps the camera crew set up, move equipment as they're shooting TV shows, movies, etc. Okay? An example of this noun in a sentence, he's been working as a grip for 2 years. Right? So in case you hear somebody with that job title, now you know. The next thing we're going to talk about is the phrase to get a grip. Generally, this phrase is going to be used in the imperative. So we're going to be giving sort of strongly worded commands to someone that we want them to kind of recover the control over their emotions, or we want them to keep control of their emotions. Another way to think of this, maybe have some self-control. So an example of this, right? Get a grip. We have to finish this by the end of the day. Now, I feel like when I have heard people say this, it can be when somebody is freaking out, right? Really kind of panicked, very upset, maybe crying. And I want to caution you, this isn't a phrase you should use anytime you see someone reacting that way. If somebody has just found out that someone has passed away, we don't want to encourage them to get a grip, right? They need to have their feelings, share their emotions, begin to process that. So I wouldn't use it in that kind of situation. And I would be careful about who I say it to. I don't think I would ever tell a boss, a manager to get a grip. Maybe a very close friend, a loved one, a family member, if I think they're overreacting to a particular situation and I want them to kind of settle down. Okay? Don't want you to get in trouble using any of these phrases. So the next phrase we'll discuss is to be in the grip. Generally, when this gets used, someone is talking about experiencing something unpleasant and not having control over it. Okay? And what immediately came to my mind was the world was in the grip of the pandemic in April 2020. Right? We were all experiencing something extremely unpleasant, and it didn't feel like we had any control over that situation. The last phrase we'll talk about today is to come to grips with. This phrase gets used as someone begins to deal with or maybe begins to develop an understanding of something. An example of this, he has started to come to grips with his wife's terminal illness. Okay? This is a sad sentence and a sad thing for anyone to have to experience. But if you find out your spouse has a very serious illness or disease, and that illness or disease will likely end up causing their death, right? That can be really hard to process, can be hard to understand, and some people try and deny it or pretend like it's not happening. But eventually, as they start to deal with it, you'll hear that phrase used. So again, many times it's used in connection to something that is unpleasant, uncomfortable, or quite difficult. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.